Hey everyone, and welcome to Women2Women Unplugged. The podcast in which we dive into the challenges and triumphs of women striving for equality around the globe. In this podcast, we are really going to talk about our own experiences as women in our respective countries and also in our respective fields, because we believe that by sharing these experiences with each other, our journey towards gender equality, our fight towards gender equality will be stronger. So we can learn from each other's experiences, and we want to share these experiences in this podcast. My name is Lecy, and today I am accompanied by 3 other amazing Women2Women alums. So let's kick it off by introducing ourselves. Alex, do you want to start?
I'll kick it off. So I'm Alexandra. I'm originally from Belgium, but I currently live in Berlin, Germany. I'm currently 28 years old. I studied media and communication studies, and after I finished my studies, I worked as a PR manager in the music industry for a little while, and right now I'm a marketing strategist in the fashion industry.
Hi everyone, my name is Greta. I am 25 years old. I am from Boston and currently live in Cambridge. And I studied physiology and neurobiology in undergrad, and then I went on to get my doctorate in pharmacy, and now I'm a pharmacist, and now I'm figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. I forgot you have one.
Hi everyone, so nice to be here. So my name is Anna, I'm 26 years old. My background is in law. I'm currently taking my master's in international and European law in Lisbon, Portugal. It's where I'm from. As I was studying and taking my bachelor's, I feel like studying only was not an option for me. So while I was taking my bachelor's, I decided to invest some time in doing innovation, social innovation, on the side as I was studying. So with that, it came to be that I organized Women2Women in Portugal, a national edition for Women2Women. And apart from that, I've been doing a lot. I've been doing volunteer campaigns for the UN. So when Aurora Kanksha, the first women running for Secretary General for the UN, I participated in her campaign as a volunteer. I was basically managing volunteers of her campaign. I'm also in a working group of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security in Portugal, and European institutions, all that jazz. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and share some insights with my experience. Currently, I am an innovation consultant while I'm taking my master's at the same time. So again, studying, I always need to do something extra from studying. So yeah, excited to be here.
Thanks, girls. Wow, I really recognize myself in that, Anna. I have a background in social sciences. I studied cultural anthropology and development sociology, but during my studies and also before my studies, I was very active. I worked as a coordinator for an NGO providing supplementary education to children from disadvantaged neighborhoods for some years. And then I started working as a keynote speaker and presenter on Generation Z. So I advised companies like Google, like Microsoft about how they can become more appealing to our generation, because sometimes it's a big mystery to them how we work, what our brains are like, what is going on in our brains. So I was giving keynote speeches about that, and then I started studying, so I kind of took a different route there. And now I graduated last February, and I started my own business, which is called Risa Global, in which we are trying to do the same thing, basically to advise companies about how to appeal to the younger generation. And we actually want to provide a platform to young people to speak out to companies about themes like diversity, corporate social responsibility, and those kind of things. So, as I just have said, in this episode, we are here to empower young women and girls around topics that are important to us regarding gender equality. And today we will be talking about pay equity. So before we dive into the causes, the consequences, and what it actually means, let's unpack pay equity first, right? And Anna, can you help me doing that?
For sure. So in my interpretation of pay equity, and from my law background and etc. I will use that as a credential for defining pay equity. Not only we're talking about being paid the same for the same job, regardless of your gender, your race, social status, etc. For me, pay equity goes beyond that. It goes to a point where, there are a lot of unseen, invisible work on our own homes. Women have been disproportionately affected by this invisible domestic work. This is also paying equity because this work is not being paid, and we spend a lot of time doing that as well. Of course, men do it, but again, this is a global transversal issue that women are disproportionately the ones doing it. It is also, for me, I would introduce here another layer of paying equity. It's also about representation. When we look at, for example, private company boards, we see that the leaders of those boards and the people sitting there are basically men, white, middle-aged men. And we don't see necessarily women there represented, especially women of color, women with disabilities, for example. So this is also about pay equity because it gives a systematic approach and a systematic and structural, I would say, not even systematic, but also structural view and perspective that this is the real cause why pay equity doesn't exist yet, because the system doesn't work for it to exist. So yeah, I think I already left here some teases so for we can discuss. So yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Is there anything that you guys would like to add?
Yeah, I think it's good that we went for equity rather than equality, because I feel like a lot of people don't really think about how different those two terms are. We're not just talking about equal pay for equal work here. We're talking about the value that work that is traditionally done by women has in society and how that is being paid as opposed to traditionally male jobs. So we really want to get into that too. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that is also very important. So we have like the actual wage disparity, the underrepresentation of women in leadership roles, the fields, the discrimination between fields that are more dominated by women usually have lower wages as well. And you also pointed out the invisible domestic work that a lot of women do, that they are not recognized and paid for. Let's go into some statistics, because those are shocking. We did some research, and to give a clearer picture of what we're actually dealing with here, the World Economic Forum, statistics of the World Economic Forum show that women earn 68% of what men earn for similar work globally. So 68%. And that is also called the gender pay gap. So that's the gap between what women earn and what men earn. So they divide what women earn between what men earn, and that's times 100 is the 68% gender pay gap globally. So for example, in the Netherlands, this gap is 14%. In Portugal, it's 17%. And in the USA, women earn, as Rick has said earlier, 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. Some statistics from the Global South. In Latin America, the gap is 29.8%, and in Eastern and Southern Africa, 21%. So that is just to give you an overview. We will also have some more audience participation later and talk to you about this, because we're also actually curious about how you are experiencing this, how your mother, your sister might be experiencing this, but that's for later.
Do you guys know the analogy of a theater when it comes to the roles that a woman has in society versus men? So when you go to watch a theater play, you have actors, but you also have people in the background building the sets, making the clothes, making sure the light is okay. In the end, when the audience applauds, they applaud for the actors. Not everyone in the background that actually are the people that made it happen. Like, those actors wouldn't have a stage to play on, clothes to play in, a text to even say out loud if the people in the background hadn't done the work. And they often use the analogy that women are those people in the background. They just do the work, and it's seen as normal and obvious, and then the men are in the forefront getting the applause, while in the end we need the work that we do in the background, and we don't ask to be applauded, but in the end, having a clean house and having children that are fed and having children that are happy is often something that is done by us and just goes in the background. So I think that's like a good kind of analogy to put when it comes to the kind of unrecognized labor that women do, because it is labor.
And also, like, something that I realized recently is when you hear 82 cents to $1, it doesn't really make, like, it doesn't really math. The math does not math in my head personally until you actually do the, like, put it into, like, annual wages. So let's say it's $82,000 to $100,000 per year, okay? So that's 28,000, round up to 30. If you do that over a lifetime, that's around, let's say you're working for 60 years of your life, give or take. 60 times 30 is what?
1,800?
1,800. So that's almost, what, is that 1,800,000? Can someone do the math?
It's a lot. It's a lot. Big number.
Actually, I have that here. I have the information here. If a man earns $50,000 annually, a woman would earn $35,500 for the same work. This results in a lifetime difference of $460,000.
That's crazy.
And that's crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a house.
That's a house. Yeah, and I really liked the analogy of the theater. And I also think, like, what is also actually happening is that the people who are even on the theater are not equally compensated for that. So it's not only the backstage people who are not equally compensated, but also the people in front, because we're actually doing the same work and not even compensated in the same way. So what I really liked what you said earlier is that we shouldn't only look at the symptoms of this. We should really, really look at the systemic change. And if we look at the system, what do you think are the causes of pay inequity?
That is a great question. When we think about pay equity, and okay, we have the facts, we have the statistics, but sometimes we forget to ask why. Why is this happening? Why am I being paid less for the same job as my male colleague just because he's a male? And when we look at it in a more nuanced way, nuance is a dangerous word, but what I mean is when you look at the overall picture of how our system is being developed and the system we live in our daily lives, like we go to college, we start working, and we have all these inequalities around us and our experience as women, I believe that when women enter the workforce, it didn't kind of came with a mentality that women are supposed to work and it's okay for a woman to work. It is also okay for a woman to stay at home and do whatever. But the pace of the change when women in the last century enter the workforce and really started working, it wasn't really discussed. Okay, but who takes care of the kids now? Or, okay, are the responsibilities now equally shared? How are we going to pay bills? Because, you know, the system of the family is that the man provides, the woman stays at home taking care of the kids. This is the overall idea that we all relate to, right? But when women enter the workforce, it wasn't really never discussed like, okay, so now men should also contribute to the house and to the kids and to the community, because this is also a very important aspect here. Not only your house, but the way women contribute to building communities. So yeah, I would start with that. I don't know if you guys want to add anything else.
Yeah, I was about to say the 40-hour work week is based on a one income family, on the fact that you have one person that works for 40 hours and then someone else that stays back and actually keeps the household in place. With two people doing those 40 hours, that's just not feasible anymore. But I feel like society hasn't caught up with that necessarily. I always say I think we messed it up a little bit for ourselves when we became very strong and independent, and then just got two jobs by accident instead of the one we already had.
And also going off of that, like from a scientific perspective, the 40-hour work week is not made for a woman's cycle. Men have, hormonally, they have a 24-hour cycle, but women, we have a 28-day cycle. So day to day, men are the same, theoretically, like hormonally, from a scientific point of view, they are the same at different hours of the day. Whereas women, we may be feeling like this one day, and then next week, it's a different stage of our cycle, and then the week after that, it's a different stage, and then a week after that, it's a different stage, and your hormones fluctuate, go up and down based on the stage of your cycle, and that's not taken into account in a 40-hour work week.
If I might add something related to what you were saying, Alex, that we made our lives a bit harder, I get that, but I don't necessarily agree with that point of view, because it wasn't us, women, because we wanted to start working that, kind of put ourselves in a difficult situation. Of course, the difficult situation ended up happening, but I feel like this neoliberal structure and system we live in, even the laws that are written around work and labor and equality, don't expect the protection of this invisible work. So I think that the symptom here and the cause here really is the fact that the way we protect women in the private space, so private space as in our homes and our lives, our individual lives, is not well done, because it doesn't reflect the reality of this invisible work. So in my perspective, okay, we really worked hard to have these rights and have economic independence and have our jobs, because it's with money in this society that you get your financial independence and are free to do whatever you want, ideally. But I want to add that we need to take into account this invisibility of domestic work and the way our children, I don't have any, I just have nieces, but the way the children of the next generations are being raised to perceive the roles of women and men. And again, I just want to make a quick note here. We are discussing this in a very binary perspective, okay, like men and women, but there's a whole other nuances we can add here in terms of gender fluidity and,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both of your points kind of connect with each other as well, because it basically comes down to women are not understood well enough to create and change the system. And what we need for that is to have women in leadership roles. And what we see right now is, I speak to many CEOs, I speak to boards, and I see that most of the times it's only men. It's only middle-aged men, white middle-aged men most of the times. So what are we going to do about that? Because I think that should be the change.
Definitely. I feel like companies are kind of quick to check the equality box. I also feel like a lot of equality work is very performative from my perception. There's a lot of equal pay for equal work situations where they're like, oh, every man that does this job in our company earns the same as a woman. But then all the executives are men and all the assistants are women. That doesn't hold up. But I feel like for a lot of people, if they have one female executive that makes the same as a male executive, they're already like, cool, we're super equal. So I feel like that's already where it starts. I feel like we need higher standards. We celebrate small victories, but don't be happy too quickly. Stay vigilant, stay critical. Don't applaud people because they did the bare minimum. Hold them to higher standards. I feel like that's already a basis that we really need to have.
Actually, this reminds me of, I don't know if you guys remember from yesterday at the Mason Fellows, there was one, I forget her name, but she was talking about how even in executive rooms, it will be a room full of men, and then it will be her, and they'll have her order coffee, order food, put away, clean up the space and things like that. And something she said really resonated with me, and she was like, but don't even offer to do that in the first place. If you're not the most junior person in the room, don't even offer. And that kind of comes back to what Alex was saying, have higher standards for others, but also for yourself. Don't let anyone say things like that to you, or tell you to do certain things that are out of your pay grade, respectfully.
Do any of you have personal experiences with that, in your careers?
I was going there because as a consultant, I work in a private company, very corporate world, and still it's not that like the typical corporate world because I work in innovation, so we are a bit more future forward thinking. But one of the things that I relate to what you were saying, Alex, in terms of, let me rephrase that. In the corporate world, when you go and get your salary and go and see the people who actually lead the company you work for example, in my company, the founders and co-founders are men. But then at the C-level of the company, C-level as CEO, COO, so the board, the people who actually make the decisions in the company, I have a woman there. And seeing her is kind of, okay, so it is possible. In my company, we're actually doing this. Okay, it's not perfect, but we're getting there. But then I look at the overall perspective in corporates and companies, and then I see this trend, and this is actually another strain that I want to bring to the conversation, that when we talk about pay equity and having, pay equality and etc. for the same job, it is also important to address the girl boss trend in terms of, this very individual way of looking at it low. I'm going to climb the corporate ladder, become a CEO or create my own business, and I'm empowering myself and I'm putting myself as a woman in a position that I'm making change because I'm breaking glass ceilings. Okay, that's really nice, but you're doing it for yourself. You're not necessarily doing for others. And this is something that I wanted to bring because in the corporate world, we see this a lot. But coming back to personal experiences, in terms of pay equity and pay transparency in my company, I see, I'll give you my personal story here. I've been working at my company for around a year and a half. And in that year and a half, I got 2 raises. Not because my bosses came to me, Anna, you're doing a great job, we want to give you this raise. No, I saw that I was taking responsibilities that my colleagues, in the same function, weren't, but people, with a bit more responsibility than I have, weren't doing it. So I was doing it, and they were getting paid way more than I was getting. So I was like, okay, this cannot be. And if the people in my own company won't necessarily advocate for myself, because that's not how companies work, and I understand that. They want to make the most amount of money at the end of the day, and I understand it clearly. That's how our world works. But I was like, okay, there's power in asking, and the worst thing that I can do is receive a no. So I asked a lot of questions to my colleagues. I asked bluntly and having, transparent conversations around money and how people are earning for their own jobs. And then I was like, okay, so I'm going to put myself forward and I'm going to ask for it. And I did. But I know I have a personality to do it. And I'm not afraid to be assertive, to be more confident and do my research. But I'm also confident and assertive because I do my research, And this is something that I really want to bring to the table, because even though the system is, sorry for the expression, screwed up for us, women, we can do some tips and tricks to go around it and try to make justice for ourselves. But again, I'm fighting for myself here. This is my personal experience. I'm not necessarily empowering others by doing this. So my way of empowering, I call it, this is my micro-feminist moment in my company, is to really share this experience and talk transparently about it with my other colleagues who are, for example, in junior positions or are in the same position as myself, but they deserve more recognition. And recognition is not only about words, it's also about money, because it's money that pays the bills at the end of the day, right? So yeah, I just wanted to give you that experience.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's very, very good advice. You're not only doing it for yourself, but also for others, and we can uplift each other. Is there anything that you experienced regarding pay?
So first off, I want to get rid of the term girl boss. I think it's one of the worst things out there. Unless we start consistently using boy boss as well. I want to campaign to get rid of girl boss. I feel like that on its own is so diminishing that, I don't know, I rose to the top, I'm a CEO, I started my own company, and they're like, oh my God, you're such a girl boss. I'm like, no, you're just objectively successful as a human being. Using the word girl to kind of categorize a woman's success to me is already so diminishing. And I don't know, I actually got my boss a mug for his birthday and it said boy boss. And it went down pretty well. Good work environment. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I used to work in music, and like the coffee situation is something that I had once in a very like kind of bad way, where there was this super big electronic music festival, and we were having a meeting with the organizers and the venue and some other people, and it was all men. So I entered the room, we're all sitting in just a regular meeting room, projecting some stuff. I'm setting up my computer, and one of the guys goes up to me and he's like, something that in Dutch, but the equivalent is like, "Hey doll, are you gonna make us some coffee?" And I was like, "I'm your marketing strategist. Like I need to present in 2 minutes. Like I'm gonna present to you how we're gonna communicate and market your festival. So no, you can make me coffee if you want." And he was like, "She's feisty." And then it was like kind of laughed away as like a funny situation. Well, in reality, that was pretty bad.
That's such an ick.
That was such an ick. That was not the vibe for sure.
And I guess like one of the experiences that I consistently face on a daily basis as a young woman in healthcare, so obviously like I'm not that tall, you can't see on video, but when I'm at the pharmacy, I feel like a lot of my patients have a hard time taking me seriously if I say something, or not a lot. This is actually a very small percentage. I'm going to say that again. But I feel like because of that, I tend to have some of my juniors, so like some pharmacy technicians, male pharmacy technicians have to explain certain concepts to patients that may not necessarily be hearing me because of my stature, perhaps my gender, who knows what it may be. But it's for some reason when they hear it from a male who, even though may not have the credentials that I do, they somehow accept it. And it's so bizarre to me how that works, because like the manner in which they address the problem, address the topic at hand changes like that when they hear it from a male to male versus from me to a male.
Yeah, I think so much of this is really a culture change that is necessary, right? Like the whole culture surrounding this needs to change. And for this, we need to change people's minds, and we mostly need to change men's minds. Yeah. I think women, we know what we want and what we deserve and what we need. So yeah, what do you think needs to change?
Before answering that, I just want to say how these experiences that Alex and Greta just told us about, I can also relate to some of it. And, you know, for example, people in a room, like a man will take your idea and assume it as it's his own idea, but it is actually mine, or a female colleague, you know, interrupt you, etc. All these things that happen. How does this relate to pay equity? It's when I said to you in the beginning that it's around the system, it's about the structure. It's really about women are perceived in the workplace. These are like other symptoms of inequality that affect the pay gap that we have in all of our countries. Like it's transversal. There's no one country in the world, I think I'm allowed to say that has pay equity. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. But you asked what to do to change?
Yeah, so yeah, you're saying it's like also how women are perceived, right? And changing this perception, well, I would not encourage anyone. I don't want us to change how other people perceive us. We shouldn't care about how other people perceive us. But what do you think needs to be changed in order to change the cultures around this?
If I may start, I will give a public policy perspective because, you know, as a law student, I think that's my area of confidence to speak. But I will give you an example. For example, in Portugal, a thing that it is currently being done, and this is the source is the working group that the Ministry of Labor that I am a part of. Portugal is actually now crossing data from social security contributions of companies to analyze the salaries that are being paid for men and for women. And when they see a big disparity, they would actually come to the company, like send a letter, an official letter or a notice saying, hey, you're not doing great at pay equity, do better, otherwise you'll get a very heavy fine. So, you know, companies need to be scared. So in another way of doing change in terms of public policy and laws that need to change to guarantee our rights, I would also say, and this is something that I'm studying in my thesis right now, that companies need to have social responsibility. And social responsibility accounts for gender issues as well, not only, but as well. And a new doctrine, this is going to get it very academic, but I'm going to make it cool for you, I promise. A new doctrine that is raising up is that companies shouldn't be perceived as private, but kind of semi-public. So they have a public responsibility, because if we see companies as private entities only, we're kind of making it equal as perceiving a citizen like me, like you, like you all, you know. And companies are not the same as us, because companies have more power than we do, and they make the decisions around that really affect our lives. So in terms of, you know, looking at the system and looking at the way our countries are organized in terms of laws and public policies, I think these two things of crossing data, making sure that the governments are pushing companies to really, you know, be accountable for pay equity, but also create systems where companies have the responsibility to have social responsibility and around gender issues as well. For me, it's really important. And I would start with this bigger perspective.
I think when discussing systemic change, it's also important to realize that we're also part of the system, right? When we think about systemic change, we think about it, okay, well, what can I do? Like, of course, the public policy aspect is so important, and like the corporate aspect so important, but also we all of us in this room are part of the system. So that change can start like right in our homes, right in our day-to-day interactions, and like that can have more of an impact than you could ever even think. So I think that's also something important to keep in mind, that it's not just, when talking about systemic change, it's not just this unthinkable, like untouchable thing that just kind of lives in the void, but it's also in our daily lives.
I also think that at the end of the day, like, the system needs to be changed, but the easiest change to make is within ourselves, I guess. That's something that we do have in hand. And I feel like something that I learned that is mildly comforting in the corporate world is the people that are the highest up aren't necessarily the nicest or the smartest or the most competent. And in a way, that's a really good thing, because at some point you just realize that in the end, it's all a game in a way. And those are just the people that figured out how to play the game, who had to like them, at what time in the year they had to be really visible, who they had to show their work to. It's not the people that put in the most hours. It's not the people that do all of the operational stuff usually. It's the people that talk and make themselves visible. And I feel like once you get through that bubble and you realize and you think of yourself against those people and you're like, actually, my projects are structured in a better way. They actually have more impact. And it's easier said than done, but once you find that confidence in yourself and you realize that the work that you do has a lot of value, definitely in comparison to some other people that might be higher up that you work with, and you do kind of take that leap to use the system, quote unquote, you can move forward. And that's something that you do have in hand. So yeah, I feel like that was a nice thing to realize. Like, oh my God, you're not that crazy smart.
I also had that aha moment one time. Yeah.
I hope it motivates everyone as well to get your facts straight, to know, to ask for that transparency, because you can ask for that. You can demand that transparency.
And for that, sorry to interrupt, but for that, information is power. When I said earlier that I do my research, like, that is very, very necessary for you to, you know the game so you can play the game, I would say.
Exactly. And even for the systemic issues, like, knowing the system is half the struggle, and then the rest just comes.
100%.
I would like to open it up to our fantastic girls who are here. Is there anyone who has a question for us about pay equity, or has something else to share, an experience that you yourself or someone you know in the workplace had themselves? The question was, in some countries, like Tunisia, laws that are in place surrounding pay equity are not really followed. They are ignored, shoved off the table. What can we as women do to change this?
Can I go for this one? Okay. I have a hot take. the laws sometimes we there's a difference between having a right, like the right is written in the law, constitution, regulation, whatever, and that then there's the enjoyment of the right, which comes with the whole system operating to protect that right, and people actually enjoy it in their daily lives. I assume that in Tunisia, as most of the countries out there, men are in power. So that's the reason why the laws are not being correctly enforced, or mainly the reason why, not only the reason why. So I would say the fastest but hardest way to go is to have more women in politics. And, this goes to the representation issue that we were discussing in the beginning. So when you have people who struggle the same as you, that can relate to your struggles and see your struggle in a different lens, maybe less privilege, because again, privilege is also a very important concept here. I don't think there is going to be any other way to make laws work for women and for other vulnerable groups than to have these same vulnerable groups represented in power and in the decision-making table. Not only represented, but actually, making the call and making the decisions. So even though this is a very vague, easier said than done answer, I genuinely believe it is the only fastest, hardest way to go. Other ways we can change is to, if it's possible and if it's safe, is to advocate for these issues as a citizen. Citizens have power, and when we come together, things sometimes actually happen. So I would say to research within your country context. I will not speak about it because I don't know. I'm not from Tunisia. So make sure that you do know the system you're fighting for and know the reasons why you're fighting for. And yeah, I would say advocate for it in the best way you can within your country.
Thank you, Anna. We have time for one more question. So the question for Greta is, while you were studying for a field that is mostly occupied by men, did you experience any gender inequity or discrimination in this process?
This is such a hard question for me to answer because it's so multifaceted, but I feel as though from my professors, I feel very privileged to say, no, I never experienced any sort of inequality or discrimination based on the sole fact that I'm a female. But I do recognize certain traits that differentiated my male colleagues or my male peers versus my female peers, in the sense that if there was a question on an exam, let's say, that was unfair, it would be the women that were like, oh, I probably got it wrong because I didn't study hard enough. But it was the men that I saw going up to the professor being like, that was an unfair question. It should not have been like that. It should have been worded like this. So it's it kind of comes back. It's all part of a bigger issue, correct? But it all comes back to, why is it that we as women are so quickly pointing the blame in words versus our male colleagues are like, no, you wrote the question wrong. I want the points back. Whereas we're kind of like, oh, maybe I didn't study hard enough. But I feel like that's one very huge thing that I saw. And that also translates to the workforce, right? So that's also part of the pay gap issue at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Greta. Thank you for your questions, girls. I wish we had more time to listen to more of your questions. But of course, this is a topic that we can discuss during lunch, dinner. I need to wrap it up. So this is where I'm going to continue doing the podcasting thingy.
Yeah, the podcast thing.
Podcast thingy.
Yeah, no, we're cutting that out, of course. So thank you all, girls, for sharing your views, your perspectives, and your experiences on this topic. Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners, for listening, for tuning in. This podcast is powered by Women2Women, Empower Peace, Women2Women Alumni Network. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episode.